Okay, so don't really know what I'm doing. Try to do this on my laptop and it didn't do any sound. So we're going to try this with my phone. And if it doesn't work this time, I'm giving up because now it's 9:35 and I'd rather be in bed. But I actually have had friends ask me this question quite a bit about favorite books. I do love to read. I don't consider myself like a just ferocious reader because I only average about 5 books a month, and I have friends who read 5 books a week. So I just don't think that it's that much. But for some people, um, it sounds like a lot. So anyway, with all that said, it's really hard for me sometimes to pick a favorite book just because a lot of times, especially if I'm enjoying it, whatever I'm reading is my favorite. But I do have some that I've reread several times or that have really stood out to me. So I tried to narrow it down to 5 of my favorite fiction books and 5 of my favorite nonfiction books. So here we go. So to start, my favorite, ultimate favorite, number one favorite fiction book is Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. It's an amazing book. I can remember back when I read it at the insurance office many, many years ago. I just went on and carried on so terrible that I made every woman that I worked with read it, and most of them found it quite enjoyable. Well, I think all of them did. A couple of them even reread it, and I have talked and bragged about this book so much that I believe in 2019 my husband actually read it, which I don't have to tell him that, but he really liked it. And fun little tidbit is that in 2021 they are going to make the movie that, or they're making the movie, but they're going to release a movie. So it's a pretty thick book, so it won't be as good as the book because they're not going to be able to get it all in 2 hours. But I think I'm excited to see what they do with it. Also, I think that this book is an awesome way if you have a friend that's a non believer but they enjoy reading, that you could. It's a book that I think believers and non believers alike would enjoy. And it's a great gateway to have maybe open a conversation about the gospel with them. So that's just something you could keep in mind. But definitely my number one all time fave. Number two. This is really going to date me. But I like to read a lot of historical fiction or authors from other times. So Miss E. Prentice, Elizabeth Prentice, wrote a book called Stepping Heavenward in the early 1900s, and it really actually reads as nonfiction because it reads like it is a uh, diary of a young girl in her teenage years, and it follows her all the way into adulthood. Um, I actually read it in my 20s for the first time, and I've read it 5 or 6 times since then. And every time I find every time I read it, I find that I identify with new truths for whatever season of life I'm in. So an amazing read for whatever age group, whether you have a young daughter or you're a mother, or you're single or you're married, whatever phase of life you're in, I think you will find this book to be very challenging. It was a favorite by Elizabeth Elliot, and we will talk about her later. So if you're a fan of her writing, just know that she was a fan of this book. My next three, I couldn't get my hands on the physical copy. Some I have loaned out to people, some are packed away somewhere. But my third is by Jeanette Oak, and it's The Calling of Emily Evans. Now, many of you are going to say, oh, I know all about Jeanette Oak. She wrote all the Love Comes Softly series, and she wrote some other series that are pretty famous. The Calling of Emily Evans is actually considered a part of a series, like The Women of the West, but each book stands on its own, so the storyline is not tied to any of the others. I love The Calling of Emily Evans. It's historical fiction, but it also really speaks to the bravery of a woman who um, feels the conviction that she's been called by the Lord to do something hard and something outside of her comfort zone. And it's almost like a missionary story, and I love missionary stories. So even though it's fiction, I think it's a very good read. It's a quick read, and it's just one that I find that I go back to. Now, this next book by Grace Livingston Hill is The Substitute Guest. And I can tell you the reason that I don't have my hands on the actual copy is it's probably with my Christmas stuff. This is my favorite read to read in December. It just puts me in the Christmas mood. The setting of the story is at Christmas. And even though it's a typical Grace Livingston Hill Christian romance story, it also just really redefines uh, family, what's important about family, what's important about the true meaning of Christmas and the gospel story, and it just makes me feel warm and kind of gets my mind in the right place for the holidays. So I love it, and that's why it's one of my favorites. Now, my last for top five of fiction, number coming in at number five is a little bit of a cheat because I couldn't pick just one. So I'm basically just going to tell you that the Mitford series, if you can get your hands on the Mitford series and fall in love with the town of Mitford like I did, by Jan Karon, Karon. And funny little story about the Mitford series is, especially toward the end of the series, it seemed like when she was releasing a new book, it was always in September. And my birthday is at the end of September, so I would always ask to, as a birthday present, to pre-order the book to have it delivered on the day it released. And so it's just like an exciting time in fall every year to get to visit the town of Mitford and all the people that live there, because you really do start to feel like you know all of these characters and you know what houses they live in and their stories and their past. And oh, I just love the Mitford series. So if you're looking for something that could maybe just be an escape from the craziness of 2020 and you haven't read the Mitford series, get At Home at Mitford. It's the first, and just see what you think. I think it would be a nice escape and enjoyable read for you. So that's my top five. Now we're going to talk about nonfiction, and I feel like I need to give you a disclaimer that you are not going to hear the following authors in my top five. You're not going to hear C.S. Lewis or Packer or John Piper or Oswald Chambers, Tozer. That does not mean that I don't absolutely love their writing, and I have all their books. They're in my bookcase. I could come take my phone and show you just around the corner where my devotional books and a lot of my nonfiction Christian books are there by where I do my Bible study. So yes, they're all great, and I feel like they make it on a lot of people's book recommendation lists. These five books are books that were very personal to me, so please don't take it that I'm saying that I don't enjoy a good C.S. Lewis or A.W. Tozer. I do. This is a different type of nonfiction. So coming in at number one, the book that I've read the most, or the most times, is It's My Turn by Ruth Bell Graham. It's her autobiography, and it's just amazing. I think maybe 7 or 8 times I've read it. I've given away copies of it to friends. I've sent copies to people that I felt like it would be an encouragement to. She grew up as a missionary's daughter, and so she saw things, amazing miracles and works of God before she was even 10 years old, things that we here in the States would just be blown away by. And she had an incredible faith that I think sometimes was maybe shadowed by this remarkable man that she was married to. But she is an amazing woman in her own right. And so if you have not read her stories, you really, really need to. It's such an encouragement, and she's quite fascinating. So this one's my fave out of nonfiction. Number two is actually a book I read in 2019. It's by Jen Wilkin. It is Women of the Word, How to Study the Bible with Both Our Hearts and Our Minds. This is by far probably one of the most challenging books that I've read, especially as it pertains to studying the Bible. I think that a lot of times women tend to give Bible studies that speak a lot to our hearts and how we connect with the Word of God because of our feelings, because we are emotional women. Um, and it's not that Jen takes away from that element, but I think she also recognizes that to study is work and it engages our minds, and that everything can't be just tied to how we feel. And so for me, she used very practical ways to be more engaging of our minds when we study the Word of God, and not just doing a little Bible study that makes us feel all warm and fuzzy. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I found a lot of practical teaching in this book about how to study the Word of God. So, Women of the Word by Jen Wilkin. Elisabeth Elliot, we talked about her a little bit a moment ago. She has written so many good books. If you haven't read her testimony, the story of her husband Jim Elliot, she was a missionary, and so you need to read Through the Gates of Splendor. There's so many things that she wrote that you should read, but my absolute favorite is actually The Shaping of a Christian Family. My only regret is that I did not read this book when my children were young or before I had children. This is actually the story she tells of how her parents grew up and then how they decided to raise their family, she and her siblings. And so she talks a lot about what life was like for her. And even though it was in a different time period than where I'm raising my children today, I found it to be incredibly insightful into just how to teach your children to trust, and how to discipline, and how to teach by example. And I just can't say enough. This is not just a parenting book. This is a book that any woman would enjoy to read and just be challenged and convicted about the faith that some of these Christian leaders that went before us had. I know for me it was convicting. So, Elisabeth Elliot, The Shaping of a Christian Family. Get your hands on it. This one you're going to laugh at when you see all the tabs that are in it. I actually just read this book in 2020. It's by Anne Ortlund. She has passed away now, but she was a pastor's wife. Disciplines of the Beautiful Woman. It was actually published in 1977, which is a year after I was born. So a lot of people, I think, might read it and think it's dated because some of the things she talks about aren't even really applicable now, when she talks about like day planners or just different things that maybe, was before we had smartphones and different devices like that. But there are so many practical ideas and just thoughts that she shares, and the way that she talks about mentoring other women and discipleship, and just like practical things, and then just very insightful things that I was just like, man, well, why did I never hear of her? Like, I've been living for the Lord all of my adult life and into my teenage years, and I never heard of Anne Ortlund or her husband Ray before. So I'm kind of sad about that. But anyway, I'm so glad I found it. And so she actually made my top 5 nonfiction. Next, and not to be considered least, of my nonfiction is by Rosaria Butterfield. It is The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. And I don't want to give a lot away because I think that you will love this book. She has also recently written another book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key, which really, she touches on it a little bit in this book about hospitality and how that's going to be the key to how we reach the world in the world that we live in now. Because so many times we can't talk about religion in the workplace. We can't talk about it in the schools. We can't talk about it at somebody else's dinner table. But when we welcome someone to our home, it's our dinner table. And but this, she actually tells the story of her conversion, which happened later in life as she was an adult. And I was really convicted to just see the way that the pastor and his wife who loved her into her conversion, how they did that, and how it looked very different than kind of what has always been spelled out to me. This is the way that you would need to reach someone who believes different than you. And her story kind of challenges that concept. But it's a very good read. I actually, before I read it in hard copy, I listened to it on Audible, and Rosaria reads it, which I found to be delightful. And if you don't have the time to read the whole book, I would at least encourage you to go online and listen to her conversion story on YouTube. She shares it at several different locations. It's about an hour long. And it's kind of basically like the first couple, maybe 1 or 2 chapters of the book, but it's definitely something you should take the time to listen to. So if you've counted, that's 5 and 5. But I have one that kind of meshed in between. It's actually a nonfiction book, but it reads a lot like fiction. In fact, I actually had it on my list of fiction reads, and then I thought, wait a minute, that's actually nonfiction. It's called Papa's Wife, and it's by Thyra Fier Bjorn, and it's actually a true story. She tells the story of her parents and how they met and fell in love and got married. Papa was a preacher, and he a Swedish preacher, and he meets his wife. And anyway, it's so amazing. It's such a great read, and it's just one of those books that makes you feel like you are taken to another place in time. It's funny, it's comical, it's endearing, and so even though I couldn't put it in the top 5 of either category, I feel like it kind of hits both, since it's nonfiction but it reads like fiction. And it's a little hard to find because it is out of print now, but I got this along with many of the books that I mentioned on Thrift Books. So if you don't use Thrift Books and you like actually to read hard copy paper books, which I enjoy, then Thrift Books is the way to go. The only other thing that I also enjoy is I do enjoy audiobooks, and so I get a lot of those from the Libby app, which is basically using your library card so that you can listen to books on Audible. I used to have a membership with Audible, but then I got the Libby app, and so now I don't have to pay $18 a month to listen to audiobooks. So for the 2 people who actually made it around all the way to the end of this, God bless you. I probably will not do anything like this again for another 5 years, but I can guarantee you that if it has anything to do with books, probably half of them will be different 5 years from now. So until then, ta-ta for now.